Behind the Rhetoric, a podcast where we explore the traditions of language, the arts of persuasion, and how rhetoric shapes not just what we believe, but what we accept as real. Hello, and welcome to the third and final episode of Behind the Rhetoric. We are your host. I'm Brian Soto.
I'm Leah McCullough.
I'm Angelina Schreier.
The audience now is probably wanting to know specifically what techniques are used to help prevent demagoguery. But you might be surprised to learn that we've already been practicing it this entire time. Throughout this 3-episode series, we've been practicing a few rhetorical techniques that can be applied in everyday life, in both the digital space and in the rest of your life, in your real life.
One of the major ones that we have made a point to practice in these episodes is demonstrating curiosity about others' positions and reasons for having them, including the emotions involved, which is something that Miller, who we've read in our class, emphasizes. And then the other part is generating trust through a pattern of generosity and curiosity. So curiosity goes hand in hand with generosity. By being curious about other people's opinions, you're also being generous of yourself. And that alone does more than you would think to combat demagoguery.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we've talked about the accountability before. That's where accountability comes. Being accountable for what we're speaking, whether we're talking in judgments or we're being open and willing to be curious and generous with our time. And that really goes back to the agency of speech. We live in a country where we can say what we want and say what we think, and free speech. But free speech does not mean we should use the freedom of every thought that comes in our head and out our mouth. Rather, we should demonstrate that curiosity in a way that's generous through empathy.
That's actually a great transition into what we're going to talk about. Us three, we're going to present an example of what it's like to apply these rhetorical techniques in analyzing demagogic rhetoric. Today, we're actually going to review a Truth Social statement of the President of the United States, Donald Trump. This was posted in his response to the beginning of the U.S.-Iran conflict. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will.
For me, I actually didn't know about it until after he had posted this. I didn't know about it immediately. My dad called me for talking about it, and I was at first like, I wanted to be surprised, but I also wasn't, because throughout this presidency, I think we've seen President Trump make a lot of statements that he didn't necessarily actually carry out. And so when I heard it, I was absolutely astonished the president of our country would say this, but I wasn't entirely surprised. And I also, my dad and I ended up having the conversation of whether or not he actually is going to do this. Because at the time that I heard about it, I didn't know if he was actually going to go through with it. And we both said whether or not he's actually going to go through with this, he needs to realize the power of his words. And I think there's a lot of people that would be like, well, he didn't actually mean it. He's not actually going to do it. But it's the principle of it. Like, when you put those words out there, you as the president are saying that there's a whole civilization whose lives you don't find valuable, you don't see humanity in. And that was just very negatively powerful, I think, to me at the time.
Yeah, so my reaction was, I think, stemmed, so it's not a secret that I'm a little bit older than both of you. I remember watching in the 90s on television. It was the first live war where I got to watch them bomb in Iraq. And then, of course, I remember 9/11, having that experience. Like, experiences fed that nauseousness because the idea of wiping out a civilization is absolutely unacceptable to me. And I appreciate the president has a agenda, and I appreciate that he has a way he wants to run the country. I also appreciate that everybody has an opinion, and the Iranians have their way of living and we have our way of ours. And it's not acceptable. Just we don't wipe people out. That's not what we do. We don't do that here on Earth. We kind of came to that agreement back in World War II. And I kind of feel
Well,
like
we
we're
thought.
all still
We
like
were
Yeah.
we all
hoping.
kind of still agree about that. And so the way I handled it, my reaction was to go out in the world and create beauty. As an artist and as a writer, I went out into nature and I took pictures of beautiful things. And then I wrote something really beautiful and I put it on social media, something that I don't really engage with, as a way to kind of counteract the sensations in my body, but also to counteract what everybody was talking about because I have friends all over the world and this was impacting everyone. It wasn't just impacting the Iranians and the Americans, it was everyone. The whole world was going, wait, what? So that was kind of how I was trying to find a way to come to terms with this verbal demagogic rhetoric and find my own way to make a little counter argument in the world of, hey, let's try to focus in a more positive light while we await the small handful of people that actually have any say over what's really going to happen today because we don't. And I think that loss of power really speaks to also demagoguery.
I agree. I kind of took a similar approach as you, Leah. I tried to be in a sense of activism as well. I saw that like in the morning when I woke up for work, and that was like the very first headline I read, and I was like, "Oh my god," you know. And I was more in line with what you two were saying. Like we didn't know for sure if he was gonna do it, but the important part was the fact that he was willing to say it. I took onto Instagram and shared my opinion about it. That we shouldn't be engaged in genocide. That's just something that I don't necessarily agree with. I also provided some people resources on how to find their representatives and send out an email. I provided an email template so that people can let their representatives know, like, hey, we need to make sure that we do our part so that our institution isn't used for genocide. One thing that some interesting things came out of those conversations, though. One is that personally, for the past 10 years, I felt kind of lonely politically and socially. Not social in the sense of personal, but social in my in greater society sense. It's just been a really rough 10 years, and I think some people share in that. But because I stopped kind of engaging politically because of the way that I first was engaging in politics, it wasn't great. But in that, people reached out to me when I posted about it saying, hey, I'm really glad that you brought it up and you're saying something because this is something I also believe in. This is something that we talked about what demagoguery does. It isolates people. It makes people feel lonelier than they actually are. Another thing that I thought was interesting in some of my discussion, I posted it in a classroom discussion for a different class. And, there was actually more mixed that I thought was more interesting and it was really engaging. One of the perspectives I saw was that, you can't take what he says as truth. You need to go by his actions, not just by his words. Other perspectives I saw in my friend groups were, for example, ultimately the conversation led to like, look, I get it. I don't agree with genocide, but I also would prefer to live under leadership that is willing to wipe out the enemy before the enemy wipes us out, which is something that demagoguery also does. It makes us scared. He really feels that he's in danger. And I guess that's a reasonable belief considering that our own leader is saying it's okay if you want to say wipe out an entire civilization, And that was sort of my journey through that truth post. This was a heavier topic than I think that we've discussed in other episodes. People might have been more on the edge of their seats. Maybe there's a lot more people typing too. But this is a perfect example. And again, this ties down to what you mentioned, Lee, about timeliness, is that rhetoric is timely. And even though the discussion is going to be difficult, it's a topic that is polarizing. It's important that we practice rhetoric so that we can all work together. Because regardless of what any individual thinks, we all need each other because we don't all have the answers to the questions and the mysteries of life that we're living through right now.
Well, I want to say thank you to my co-hosts. This has been a wonderful project to work on, and to have the three of us come together from different backgrounds and different experiences and to get each to know each other behind the scenes was an activity in practicing these techniques that we've discussed, and also to realize how much more we are alike than we are different. That spans age gap and heritage and, location on the planet Earth and all of those things. So I wanted to say thank you guys.
I second that.
No, I totally agree. The course was a great example of what it's like practicing. And even though we didn't really show it here in this conversation, like what it's like to have disagreements, because, admittedly, it seemed like we were all aligned. There were moments in our course where we did have disagreements. And in past conversations, I noted that you two specifically, I was really excited for this project because throughout the course, each of you presented a challenge to my way of thinking throughout the course. And it really forced me to think things differently on some of the projects that we were doing. And I feel like it made me a better rhetorician. And that's what I hope that this conversation did for the audience. I hope that our episodes and I hope that our conversations and the examples of the rhetorical techniques that we were practicing helps you be better people, not just better rhetoricians. So we hope that you were able to learn a little bit more behind the power behind the rhetoric. Thanks for joining us.